technology looking down on each of the mosques. This is what he found. When he looked at the great mosque in Guangzhou in China in 630, it's facing Petra, not Mecca. When he looked at the great Humayma Mosque, southwestern Jordan, the Qibla is facing Petra. It should be facing Mecca. The older mosque that was rebuilt then, he noticed there, the floor plan, finally was. The newer mosque, sorry. The great mosque at Baalbek in Lebanon, it's facing Petra. It should be facing Mecca. When he went to the great mosque of Sana'a in Yemen, the capital city of Yemen, right at the very bottom of the peninsula, built in 705. Now look at the date. All the Qiblas were supposed to be canonized in 624. So every mosque after 624 should be facing Mecca. But here's one built in 705, and it's facing Petra, not Mecca. This is an interesting one. This is in Jerusalem. Now you have the Dome of the Rock right here. That's the beautiful Dome of the Rock. Here you have the Al-Aqsa Mosque here. The Dome of the Rock is built in 691. The Al-Aqsa Mosque is built in 709. Look at the entire citadel, including both the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa, are all facing Petra. 691, 709. The entire citadel is facing Petra, the third most holy shrine in Islam. The Damascus Mosque, built in 709, it's facing Petra. It should be facing Mecca. The Anjar Mosque in Lebanon, look at the date, 714. It's facing Petra. It should be facing Mecca. The Mosque of Umar in Basra, now we're in Syria, 720. We're almost 100 years later. If the Qibla had its canonization in 624. This is 720. Almost 100 years later, it's still facing Petra, not Mecca. It's not till 727 that they finally found a mosque in Pakistan, Banbor in Pakistan, facing Mecca instead of Petra. This is over 100 years later. But then in 728, here you find a Qibla in the Qasr al-Khayr al-Sharqi in Syria. It's not facing Petra or Mecca. Looks like they're a little confused on this one. Now here's what's interesting. Take a look at this mosque from Amman in Jordan. This is the older mosque, built in 700. It's facing Petra. They then rebuilt another mosque behind it and above it in 740. It now is facing Mecca the right way. So what happened between 700 and 740? That's the question we need to ask. The Mushata Mosque in Amman, now we're in 743. It's back to Petra again. This is 120 years later. The Rabat, now when we get to North Africa, they don't seem to know where to face. Because in Tunisia, here's a fortress in Susa, Tunisia, in 770, it's not facing Petra or Mecca, it's facing directly south. They're a little confused in North Africa. The same way in Spain. Take a look at Spain. There's Petra, there's Mecca, it's facing quickly south. Obviously, there's something that we need to find out about North Africa and Spain as to why they're completely miscued. The great mosque in Qur'AN in Tunisia in 870. Now we're into the 9th century. See, these are much later mosques. In the 9th century, there seems to be some type of confusion here because they're not facing Petra or Mecca. It's facing straight south again, much like you found in other North Africa. But take a look at these. Were up until 725, excuse me. Up until 725, every Qibla was facing Petra. And what's interesting is they were all uniformly facing Petra. I've heard Muslims try to say, well, they didn't know their direction at that time. Listen, these were camel herders. They went through the deserts. There were no roads in the deserts. And even the paths they used to take would be covered over by a sandstorm. So how did they know where to go? They used the stars. They were brilliant at knowing direction. Otherwise, they would have died. You can't tell me they did not know where Petra was or where Mecca was. The fact that they're all facing Petra until 725 shows me. So from 622 to 725, every mosque he looked at was uniformly 100% facing Petra. Between 725 and 822, there seems to be a confusion. There seems to be something going on. We don't know what it is yet. But there was still backwards and forwards, especially in North Africa. They didn't know where to go. So 12% of the mosques were facing Petra. 50% started now to face Mecca. 38 were parallel or in other directions. And it isn't till 822 that every mosque begins to face Mecca. That's 200 years later. It takes them 200 years to get every mosque facing Mecca. Now we should ask, why is it that no one's known that before? That to me is hugely troubling. So why Petra? Well, take a look where Petra is. Remember that Arab trade route? I showed you where Petra, it's in the center of all the trade. See, Mecca's not even on the trade route map for one very good reason. There was no trade that went through Mecca. But Petra is on the center of every route. What is Petra known for? How many people have been to Petra? Has anybody been there? Okay, one man, two. What do you notice about Petra? It has tombs and temples. It was a center of the Nabatean kingdom. The Nabateans, we know about the Nabateans. They existed from the 2nd century BC. They existed, in fact, it's the Nabatean kingdom that we get the name Allah. Allah is a Nabatean god. The black stone that's in the Kaaba comes from Petra. What's more, Arabic, the language Arabic comes from Nabatean script. They are the precursors to the Arabs. And yet all of their mosques and all of their temples all around the world were facing Petra up until 725. Let's take a look at Petra even closer. Look at Petra. It's in a valley. It has a parallel valley. It has a stream going right through it. It has fields, trees, grass, clay, loam. It has olive trees. It's near this. If there was ever a pillar of salt that Lot's wife would have been, it would have been close to Petra, because that's exactly where that event took place. Petra has all the items listed above from the Quran and the Islamic traditions. Everything that we see in the Quran and the Islamic traditions fit Petra. None of them fit Mecca. Thus, could it be Petra that all these places were referring to? What's more, take a look at Ad, Thamud, Midian. Remember the people that are referred to in the Quran over and over again? 23 times these people from Ad, 24 times the people from Thamud, 7 times from people from Midian. Take a look and see where they are. They're all around Petra. They lived right around Petra. No wonder whoever was writing or whoever was coming in contact with these people, they were living, whoever that person was, that messenger, that prophet, was living 600 miles further north. Not in Mecca. Mecca's way down here. 600 miles between the two. So what's the significance? And this is what we need to unpack today. We don't know anything about Muhammad at all in the 7th century. Now, we do know from outside sources. We do have this from extra Quranic sources. We do have references to Muhammad. The Doctrina Iacobi, which is right here in the British Library, written in 634, refers to him by name. But it doesn't say where he's from. It doesn't say what he does. It just warns people, be careful of this man Muhammad. The writings of Sabaeus, written in 660, do talk about Muhammad and warn the Christians to be careful of him. But it doesn't place him in any place, nor does it give him much significance, other than the fact that he was a man who did an awful lot of warring. What's interesting is the earliest documents we can find from within Arab sources, from within Muslim sources, the Maghazi documents, which are the earliest part of the Siratul Rasulullah, written by Ibn Hisham in 833. The earliest documents that Ibn Hisham was dependent on are the Maghazi documents. The Maghazi documents means raids. He was a raider. That's what he did. Now can you understand that even his biography from 624 to 632 are about raid after raid after raid after raid. He was involved in 29 raids himself, and he planned another 39 according to his own traditions. That fits the man that we're talking about. It fits the historical character. But nowhere does it say that we can find of these raids being way down in Mecca. It looks like they must have been much further north. His biography doesn't even appear till the 9th century. His city doesn't appear till the 8th century, 741. Thus, much of what we know of Muhammad is written down hundreds of years later and hundreds of miles away. It looks like he is nothing more than a later redaction, possibly Abdul Malik. putting back onto a historical character that which the man who put back didn't never know. So Humphrey's conclusions, Islam in the Prophet's life as we know it, was not derived from the 7th century, but evolved over a period of 200 to 300 years and redacted back onto the Prophet's life and compiled in the 9th century. And that's what now the historians are now concluding. And you can see why they're coming to that conclusion. Let's summarize this real quickly. New books are being published which question the classical account of Islam. Why are there no Muslim sources for 200 years? That's the first question. Why do the claims they make do not fit the historical record? That's the second claim. Why are all the geographical references so few and confusing? And why do they all seem to be much further north, not where they should be? Why are there so many references to vegetation which would not exist in Mecca? Why is Mecca not even mentioned until 741? And why can we not find any map with Mecca on it until 900 AD? Muhammad died in 632. Takes them almost 300 years to put Mecca on a map. Why is Mecca not on the trade route? So these are all the questions we're asking now. So why do the Qiblas face Petra for the first 100 years, then are confused for the next 100 years, and are not standardized to Mecca until 822, nearly 200 years too late? Therefore, much of what we know about early Islam is in doubt. So, here's the million-dollar question. What really happened? Now, I have to be careful because this is what I think. I may change tomorrow. I may have a complete different scenario in 1 year because we're now getting lots of material that's coming in. But this is where I think, this is what I believe. This is just me. This is what I think happened looking at everything that we've got so far. And this is a what if scenario, okay? To make sense of all this, I think we need to go back to Abdul Malik. And this is what it's not just me saying this is what almost all the historians are saying. You need to start with Abdul Malik, who ruled Islam from 685 to 705. He was the second caliph amongst the Marwanid caliphs. Marwan came into power in 680. Before that was Sufyan family from 661 up until 680. So for the first 20 years of the Umayyad Caliphate, it was a Sufyani family. Marwan finally takes over. Marwan's son, Abdul Malik, is the great Arab reformer. He is known as the great Arab reformer. You can see that the Arabs control that part of the world. Therefore, by the time he comes to power, they had controlled that part from 642. So for 40 years, they had now controlled that part of the world, the central part, the area where Jerusalem is, where Damascus is, where also Petra is, also where Mecca and Medina would be. For 40 years, however, they did not control it. They were nothing more than nomads. These nomads that went and took over the Sassanid Empire and then took over the Byzantine Empire. Remember that map I showed you? Remember, those two empires were much more sophisticated. They were empires that had huge cities. The nomadic Arabs did not have big cities. They were nomads. They just had little oases. Therefore, they didn't know how to run cities. That's the first question we should have been asking. Take a look at Islam. Look at how sophisticated it is. Look at all its rules and regulations, all these sharia, these 4 laws of fiqh. They all would fit in an urban environment, not a nomadic environment. Why haven't we asked this question from the very beginning? How could a nomadic people have such sophisticated rules and regulations dealing with so huge metropolitan areas? Unless, of course, these rules and regulations come much later. So what did the nomads do? Well, let me go back, and I should have had this map in here. Remember that map that we have of the Sassanid Empire? They had two groups, the Lakhmids and the Ghassanids, that they would pay to keep the Arabs in the desert. The Ghassanids were paid by the Byzantines, and the Lakhmids were paid by the Sassanians, the Persians. And as long as they got paid, these groups kept the nomads in the desert. But after 200 years of warring with each other, the Sassanids against the Byzantines, they ran out of money. This is well known. Once they ran out of money, they no longer played the Ghassanids, and they no longer played the Lakhmids. And so therefore, the nomadic Arabs could just move right into these empires. And they did. This is well known. This happens all the time. The Mongols did it much later. The Visigoths did it in Europe. Barbarians who come into much more sophisticated environments. What happens when barbarians take over sophisticated environments? They don't know how to run cities. The Arabs didn't know how to run any of these cities. So what did they do? They stayed outside the cities. They built garrison towns. But someone had to run these cities. Who would they have chosen? Well, they chose people like them. People who also came from Abraham, but not through Ishmael, through Isaac. Cousins, Jews and Christians, who did know how to live in cities. And they were also very literate, and they were also very academic. And that's why they used the Jews and Christians to run the cities for them, because they were cousins of Abraham. People of the book, Al-Kitab. What's more, these people, because they were so close to them, then took on a status called Mauli or Moali. This is well known, that they took on like an indentured status. They could not actually be Muslims unless they converted, but there was no such idea of Muslim at this time. There was no name of people called Muslim. There was no religion called Islam. We don't have those references until 690. So for 40 years, these Arabs were dependent on the Jews and Christians to run everything for them. Now, what happens after 40 years? You can see the problem. By the time Abdul Malik comes to power, he realizes that there is no Arab identity. He needed an Arab identity. You want to create your own identity. It's very clear that the Arabs did not have a prophet. It's very clear that the Arabs did not have a book like the Jews and Christians had. They had a whole line of prophets. They had whole slews of books, 66 books. Nothing in the line of Ishmael. But you're the ones that now control the world. You control all these Jews and Christians. So we know, and this is well known, that Abdul Malik is known as the great Arab reformer. He's the one that introduces Arabic as the international language. He is the one that introduces this Arab identity. This is well known. We can see that because when you look at Abdul Malik, take a look at the coins, and they're right here in the British Museum. Look at the coins. So the coins that the Byzantines had were the emperor with two retainers on either side, and then they would have an orb with the Byzantine cross. On the back side is the Byzantine cross. When the Arabs took over, they had to keep the same coinage so they could still continue having commerce with all the people in that type of the world. But what they did is they took off the Byzantine emperor and they put the caliph here. So this is the caliph with two retainers. No longer is there an orb with a cross. You notice the back side still looks like a cross, but it's missing the cross piece. So no one would confuse that this is a cross to make it Arab. All right? But how can you have images of caliphs on the back of coins? Are Muslims allowed to have images anywhere? This is anathema. So how can these coins, which continue, these are the coins that introduced by the Umayyads, the first Muslims supposedly, right? Coins, every caliph had their image on their coin. Until you get to Abdul Malik. Abdul Malik first introduces himself with an image. But then he takes it off and he introduces these coins in 691. In 691, he introduces coins with only Arab script. He takes off the image and introduces an Arab script. And take a look what's on that coin. For the first time, you see the Shahada. That's the first time we see the Shahada. Ah, I lie. It's the second time we see the Shahada. The first time we see the Shahada is on the Dome of the Rock. Who builds the Dome of the Rock? I've got a bad cold, by the way, and a fever, so I'm trying to fight my fever simultaneously with this water. Who is the one that builds the Dome of the Rock? It's Abdul Malik. The Dome of the Rock is considered to be the third most holy shrine in all of Islam, right? Am I correct on that? Ask any Muslim why the Dome of the Rock is built, and they will tell you, well, that's where Muhammad went to the seven heavens. Remember I said that earlier tonight, right? That's the story that happens in 621. It's called a Miraj, and it's to commemorate that event, which means that building should have some reference to that occasion, right? Take a look at the Dome of the Rock. Look where it's situated.